everyone, welcome back. This week I'd like to tell you about Mexican Gothic, the 2020 book by author Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And she is a Mexican-Canadian author, and this book won the Goodreads choice for horror in 2020. So Mexican Gothic is about Noemi, a young debutante sent to kind of rescue her cousin who has she's recently married and moved to live with her husband, but she sent this really mad and rambling letter back to her uncle. And so Noemi is sent to go and check on her, and maybe a little bit to distract Noemi from the local boys and scene, which she is fond of. Her father wants to keep her out of trouble, so to speak. So the title leads us to believe that we will be reading a very traditional Gothic tale in Mexico, but that's not really exactly what you're getting. While the Gothic tropes are evident, this is just as much a Lovecraftian weird tale as it is a tribute to Stoker or Poe or Del Toro even. As such, there's definitely a Byron-esque bad boy and a fog-shrouded haunted house. And at the same time, we have the standard role of the female as a helpless victim. She's drawn into the desire and temptation and strangeness of this house, falling prey to the magnetism of the masculine figure. However, Noemi kind of turns that trope on its edge, as well as turning the trope of the Lovecraftian protagonist. Noemi is neither selfless nor innocent, and she takes the role of the weird tale, scholarly, capable, witty protagonist instead. So that was very refreshing to have a woman in that role. So let me read you a little bit of this. Go. Get the glasses. All right. When Noemi was a little girl and Catalina read fairy tales to her, she used to mention the forest, that place where Hansel and Gretel tossed their breadcrumbs, or Little Red Riding Hood met a wolf. Growing up in a large city, it did not occur to Noemi until much later that forests were real places which could be found in any atlas. Her family vacationed in Veracruz, in her grandmother's house by the sea, with no tall trees in sight. Even after she grew up, the forest remained in her mind, a picture glimpsed in a storybook by a child, with charcoal outlines and bright splashes of color in the middle. It took her a while, therefore, to realize that she was headed into a forest, for El Triunfo was perched on the side of a steep mountain, carpeted with colorful wildflowers and covered thickly with pines and oaks. Noemi sighted sheep milling around and goats braving sheer rock walls. Silver had given the region its riches, but tallow from these animals had helped illuminate the mines, and they were plentiful. It was all very pretty. The higher the train moved and the closer it got to El Triunfo, though the more the bucolic landscape changed, and Noemi reassessed her idea of it. Deep ravines cut the land, and rugged ridges loomed outside the window. What had been charming rivulets turned into strong, gushing rivers that spelled doom should anyone be dragged by their currents. At the bottom of the mountains, farmers tended groves and fields of alfalfa, but there were no such crops here, just goats climbing up and down rocks. The land kept its riches in the dark, sprouting no trees with fruit. Noemi was prepared for the chill of the mountain. The unexpected element was therefore the thin fog that greeted her that afternoon. She looked at it curiously as she adjusted her teal calo hat with the long yellow feather, and peered into the street, looking at her ride. For there could hardly be any mistaking it. It was the single automobile parked in front of the station, a preposterously large vehicle that made her think of swanky silent film stars of 2 or 3 decades earlier, the kind of automobile her father might have driven in his youth to flaunt his wealth. But the vehicle in front of her was dated, dirty, and needed a paint job. Therefore, it was not truly the kind of automobile a movie star would drive these days, but seemed to be a relic that had been haphazardly dusted off and dragged into the street. She thought the driver might match the car and expected to find an elderly man behind the wheel. But a young fellow of about her age in a corduroy jacket stepped out. He was fair-haired and pale. She didn't realize anyone could be that pale. Goodness, did he ever wander into the sun? His eyes uncertain, his mouth strained to form a smile or a greeting. And let me skip ahead just a little bit. I want to read you about the house. Then, all of a sudden, they were there, emerging into a clearing, and the house seemed to leap out of the mist to greet them with eager arms. It was so odd. It looked absolutely Victorian in construction, with its broken shingles, elaborate ornamentation, and dirty bay windows. She'd never seen anything like it in real life. It was terribly different from her family's modern home, the apartments of her friends, or the colonial houses with facades of red tezontle. The house loomed over them like a great, quiet gargoyle. It might have been foreboding, evoking images of ghosts and haunted places, if it had not seemed so tired. Slats missing from a couple of shutters, the ebony porch groaning as they made their way up the steps to the door, which came complete with a silver knocker shaped like a fist dangling from a circle. It's the abandoned shell of a snail, she told herself, and the thought of snails brought her back to her childhood, playing in the courtyard of their house, moving aside the potted plants and seeing the roly-polies scuttle about as they tried to hide again, or feeding sugar cubes to ants despite her mother's admonishments. Also the kind tabby which slept under the bougainvillea and let itself be petted endlessly by the children. She did not imagine they had a cat in this house, nor canaries chirping merrily in their cages that she might feed in the mornings. Frances took out a key and opened the heavy door. Noemi walked into the entrance hall, which gave them an immediate view of the grand staircase of mahogany and oak with a round stained glass window on the second landing. I think I'll stop there. Don't want to ruin it too much. So, be ready for a tale dripping with contagion, disease, rot, decay, corruption, just moldering on the pages. But be warned, this is not Wuthering Heights in Mexico. This is much more weird tale. There's a bit of body horror and definitely a rapey scene or two. So if that's going to bother you, I don't recommend this book. Anyway, like my channel, subscribe, share, buy the book if you're interested. If you buy from my link below in the description, I get a little kickback from that. And then leave me a comment. Have you read this book? What do you think of it? Did you enjoy it? I've heard mixed reviews, but I very much did enjoy it. Leave me a suggestion for what I should read next. I'd love to hear it. This one came strongly recommended to me by a friend, and another friend asked me to do a video for it. So I'd love to hear from you as well. See you next week.